The woman in the faded calico dress stumbled into the livery stable just as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her face pale as death and her hands shaking so badly she could barely grip the wooden beam that kept her upright. Zachary Young looked up from the saddle he was oiling, his weathered hands pausing mid-motion as he took in the sight before him. The woman appeared half-starved, her dress torn at the hem and covered in dust that spoke of hard miles traveled. Her dark hair hung in tangles around her shoulders, and her eyes darted nervously toward the street behind her like a rabbit watching for wolves. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse and desperate. "I need somewhere to hide, just for tonight. I can work, I can clean, I can do anything you need, but please don't send me back out there." Zachary set down the saddle cloth slowly, his blue eyes studying her carefully. He was 32 years old and had seen enough of life on the Texas frontier to know when someone was running from real trouble. Jefferson, Texas, in the year 1878, was a bustling riverport town where steamboats brought all kinds of people through, but this woman looked different from the usual travelers. She looked hunted. "Who's after you?" he asked, keeping his voice low and steady. "It doesn't matter," she said quickly. "If you tell me to go, I'll go. I won't bring trouble to your door. I just thought maybe for one night I could rest somewhere that wasn't the open ground." Zachary glanced toward the stable entrance. The streets of Jefferson were busy at this hour, with merchants closing up their shops and workers heading to the saloons for their evening drinks. The Cypress Bayou ran through town, and he could hear the familiar sound of steamboat whistles in the distance. "What's your name?" he asked. The woman hesitated, and he could see her weighing whether to lie. "Julia," she finally said. "Julia Zimmerman." "Well, Julia Zimmerman, I'm Zachary Young, and this here is my stable. I've got a room in the back where I sleep, and there's a small storage room next to it with a cot. It's not much, but it's got a door that locks and nobody comes back there without going through me first." Tears welled up in Julia's eyes, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as if trying to hold back a sob. "I can't pay you, not right now, but I swear I'll work off whatever you ask. I'm good with horses. I grew up on a farm in Missouri before everything went wrong." "We'll worry about payment later," Zachary said, making a decision that felt right in his gut despite the questions it raised. "Right now, you look like you need food and rest more than anything else." He led her through the stable, past the stalls where horses nickered softly in the growing darkness. The stable was his pride and accomplishment, built over 6 years of hard work after he'd saved enough money from working cattle drives and breaking horses for local ranchers. It was a solid business in a town like Jefferson, where people needed reliable care for their animals. The storage room was small but clean, with a narrow cot, a wooden chair, and a shelf that held spare blankets and tools. Zachary lit the oil lamp on the shelf, casting warm light across the space. "There's a pump out back for water," he said. "I'll bring you something to eat in a few minutes. The door locks from the inside so you can feel safe tonight." Julia looked around the small room as if it were a palace. "Thank you," she whispered. "You don't know what this means to me." Zachary nodded and left her to settle in, heading to his own quarters where he kept a small stove and supplies. He heated up some leftover stew and cut thick slices of bread, arranging them on a tin plate. When he returned to the storage room, he knocked softly before Julia opened the door a crack. She'd washed her face and hands, and in the lamplight he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, probably around 26 or 27. Despite the exhaustion and fear in her eyes, there was a strength to her features that suggested she'd fought hard to survive whatever had brought her here. "Eat slowly," he advised as he handed her the plate and a cup of water. "Your stomach won't thank you if you rush it after going hungry." Julia nodded and took the food with trembling hands. "How did you know I was hungry?" "I've been hungry enough times myself to recognize the signs," Zachary said simply. "Get some rest. We can talk more in the morning." That night, Zachary lay awake in his own room, listening to the sounds of the stable and wondering what kind of trouble he might have invited into his life. But there had been something in Julia's eyes, a desperate honesty that convinced him she was running from something real and dangerous. He'd been raised by a mother who taught him to help those in need, and even though she'd passed 5 years ago, her lessons still guided him. The next morning, Zachary rose before dawn as he always did. He had horses to feed, stalls to muck out, and a full day of work ahead. He was surprised when he found Julia already awake, standing in the stable yard with her sleeves rolled up. "Put me to work," she said. "I meant what I said about earning my keep." Zachary studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Can you really handle horses?" "My father bred them," Julia said, "before he died and my mother remarried. I know how to feed them, groom them, check their hooves for stones, and spot signs of colic or lameness." "All right then," Zachary said. "Let's see what you can do." Over the next few hours, Julia proved she hadn't exaggerated her skills. She moved confidently among the horses, speaking to them in low, soothing tones that calmed even the most skittish animals. She worked efficiently, mucking out stalls and hauling fresh hay with a determination that impressed Zachary. As they worked side by side, Zachary found himself stealing glances at her. In the morning light, with some of the fear and exhaustion faded from her face, she was striking. Not in the delicate way of the town ladies who promenaded along the streets in their fine dresses, but in a natural, unadorned way that spoke of genuine character. "You've got a good touch with them," Zachary said as they paused to rest around midday. "That bay mare over there, she's usually snippy with strangers, but she took to you right away." Julia smiled, and it was the first time Zachary had seen her face light up. "Animals are easier than people," she said. "They don't judge you for your past." "Most people don't either," Zachary said carefully. "At least, not the ones worth knowing." Julia's smile faded. "You don't know what I've done, what I'm running from." "You're right, I don't," Zachary said, "and I won't press you to tell me. But I've been around long enough to know the difference between someone running from the law and someone running from a bad situation. You've got the look of the second kind." Julia was quiet for a long moment, her hands twisting together. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was married. His name was Thomas Zimmerman, and when I met him 3 years ago in Missouri, I thought he was everything a woman could want. Successful, charming, attentive. My mother's new husband encouraged the match, said Thomas would provide well for me." She paused, and Zachary saw her jaw tighten. "It wasn't until after the wedding that I learned what kind of man he really was. He had a temper, especially when he drank, which was often, and he had business dealings that weren't entirely legal. When I tried to leave him the first time, he found me within 2 days and dragged me back. He said if I ever tried again, he'd kill me, and I believed him." Zachary felt anger rising in his chest, but he kept his voice calm. "What changed?" 2 months ago, I overheard Thomas and his partners planning a bank robbery in Kansas City. They were going to kill the bank manager to avoid witnesses. I knew then that I couldn't stay, no matter what he threatened. So I took what little money I'd saved from household expenses, packed one small bag, and left in the middle of the night while Thomas was passed out drunk. I've been moving ever since, working odd jobs where I could, sleeping rough when I had to, always looking over my shoulder." "Does he know you're in Jefferson?" Zachary asked. Julia shook her head. "I don't think so. I've been careful to cover my tracks, changing my route several times, never staying anywhere long enough to leave a trail. But Thomas is persistent and he has connections. I know he's looking for me." Zachary made a decision then that would change both their lives. "You can stay here as long as you need to. Work in the stable, keep your head down, and we'll figure out the rest as we go." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Julia asked, her eyes searching his face. "Because everybody deserves a chance at a better life," Zachary said. "And because I've got a feeling you're the kind of person who'll make something good out of that chance." Over the following weeks, Julia settled into a routine at the stable. She worked hard from dawn until dusk, proving herself invaluable to Zachary's business. Customers began commenting on how well-groomed their horses looked, and word spread that the Young livery stable provided the best care in Jefferson. Zachary found himself looking forward to each day in a way he hadn't in years. Julia's presence brought life to the stable beyond just the physical help she provided. They fell into easy conversation during their work, sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes, and the small observations that made up daily life. "Did you always want to run a stable?" Julia asked one afternoon as they repaired a broken stall door together. "Not exactly," Zachary admitted. "When I was younger, I had dreams of having my own ranch, raising cattle and breeding horses on a big spread of land. But that takes more capital than a working cowboy can save. The stable was a way to build toward that dream, putting down roots in one place while still working with animals." "Do you still want the ranch?" Julia asked. Zachary looked at her, noting the genuine interest in her eyes. "Someday, maybe. But I've learned that life has a way of changing your dreams into something different and sometimes better than what you originally imagined." Julia smiled. "That's a wise way to look at it." As summer deepened into autumn, Zachary realized his feelings for Julia were growing beyond simple friendship or employer concern. He found himself noticing small things about her: the way she hummed softly when she worked, the careful attention she paid to the animals under her care, the resilience she showed despite everything she'd been through. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her spirit that truly captivated him. One evening in late September, after they'd finished the day's work, Zachary invited Julia to walk with him down to the Cypress Bayou. The water reflected the golden light of sunset, and steamboats moved slowly along the current. "It's beautiful here," Julia said, watching the water. "I never expected to find a place that felt so peaceful." "Jefferson's a good town," Zachary said. "It's got its rough edges like any frontier settlement, but there's opportunity here for people willing to work for it." Julia turned to look at him. "Zachary, I need to tell you something. These past months working with you have been the happiest I've been in years. You've given me more than just a place to hide. You've given me hope that I can have a real life again. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," Zachary said, his heart beating faster. "Having you here has meant more to me than you know. This stable, my whole life really, it felt empty before you came. Like I was just going through motions without any real purpose beyond survival. But now, every day feels full of possibility." "Zachary," Julia said softly, and there was something in her voice that made him step closer. "I know this might not be the right time," he said, speaking from his heart without overthinking the words. "And I know you're still healing from everything you've been through. But I need you to know that my feelings for you go beyond just helping someone in need. These months of working beside you, talking with you, learning who you really are, I've fallen in love with you, Julia. Completely and truly in love." Tears shimmered in Julia's eyes, but they were different from the desperate tears he'd seen that first night. These were tears of joy. "I love you too," she whispered. "I was afraid to admit it, even to myself, because I didn't think I deserved to be happy after everything that happened. But you make me feel safe, Zachary. Not just physically safe, but safe to be myself, to have dreams again, to imagine a future I never thought possible. Zachary reached out and gently took her hand, and when she didn't pull away, he drew her closer. Their first kiss was tender and sweet, filled with all the emotion they'd been holding back for months. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and somewhere in the distance, a steamboat whistle sounded, but neither of them noticed anything beyond the moment they were sharing. That night marked a turning point in their relationship. They were still careful, maintaining propriety in the eyes of the town, but everyone who saw them together could sense the bond between them. Zachary began making plans for their future, thinking about expanding the stable and maybe purchasing some land on the outskirts of Jefferson where they could build a proper house and start that horse breeding operation he'd always dreamed about. But happiness, Zachary had learned, often attracted trouble. It was a cold morning in November when a stranger rode into Jefferson. He was a hard-looking man with cold eyes, riding a fine black horse and asking questions about a woman matching Julia's description. The town barber mentioned it to his customers, and word eventually reached the stable. Julia's face went white when Zachary told her. "It's one of Thomas's associates," she said, her voice shaking. "He must have picked up my trail somehow." "We don't know that for certain," Zachary said, though his gut told him she was right. "But we should be careful. Maybe you should stay in the back rooms for a few days until this fellow moves on." Julia nodded, but fear had returned to her eyes, that same hunted look she'd worn the night she first arrived. The stranger stayed in town for 3 days, asking questions and watching people. Zachary continued running the stable as normal, telling curious customers that his helper had taken ill and was resting. On the 3rd evening, the stranger appeared at the stable entrance. "I'm looking for someone," the man said without preamble. A woman, about 27 years old, dark hair, might be using the name Julia or maybe something else. She's got a scar on her left wrist from a burn. Zachary's blood ran cold. Julia did have that scar. She'd told him it was from an accident with a cooking pot when she was a child. This man knew details that confirmed Julia's fears. "Why are you looking for this woman?" Zachary asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Her husband is worried sick about her," the stranger said, his tone suggesting anything but concern. "She ran off, probably got confused or scared. He just wants to bring her home safe." "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Zachary said flatly, "but Jefferson gets a lot of travelers. If she was here, she's probably moved on by now." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "You're certain about that?" "I'm certain I answered your question," Zachary said, meeting the man's gaze steadily. After a long, tense moment, the stranger nodded slowly. "If you do see her, there's a reward for information leading to her return. $100, which is good money for a working man." "I'll keep that in mind," Zachary said. The stranger rode out of Jefferson the next morning, but Zachary knew this wasn't over. Thomas Zimmerman now knew Julia had been in Texas, and he'd keep searching. They needed a more permanent solution. That evening, Zachary sat down with Julia in his quarters, the lamp casting shadows across their worried faces. "We need to talk about what happens next," Zachary said gently. "I've been thinking about this a lot, and I see a few options." Julia nodded, her hands clutched tightly in her lap. "I should leave. I've put you in danger just by being here." "That's not one of the options," Zachary said firmly. "I'm not letting you run again, Julia, not alone." "Then what?" she asked, looking up at him with desperate eyes. "First option is we go to the law," Zachary said. "Tell them everything, get protection. Maybe testify against Thomas if he's wanted for those robberies you mentioned." Julia shook her head. "Thomas has friends in law enforcement, at least in Missouri, and I have no proof of anything except my word against his. A husband has legal rights over his wife, Zachary. Even if they believed me about the abuse, most lawmen would just send me back to him. Zachary felt frustrated because he knew she was right. The law in 1878 wasn't designed to protect women in Julia's situation. Second option, he continued, is we disappear together. Head west to California or north to Montana, somewhere Thomas can't easily follow, start over completely. You'd give up everything you've built here, Julia asked, her eyes searching his face. Your business, your life, all of it. In a heartbeat if it meant keeping you safe, Zachary said. But there's a third option, and I think it's the best one, though it requires something from both of us. What is it? Zachary took both her hands in his. Marry me, Julia. Not just because we love each other, though God knows I love you with everything I am, but because if you're my wife, legally married under Texas law, it changes things. Thomas has no claim on you anymore. We can build a life here together, and if he or his people come back, they'll be dealing with both of us and with the community we're part of. Julia's eyes filled with tears. But I'm already married, Zachary. Even if I ran away, even if Thomas is a monster, in the eyes of the law, I'm still his wife. Not if we do this right, Zachary said. I've been thinking about this, and I talked to Judge Morrison today, hypothetically, of course. Texas law recognizes divorce on grounds of abandonment and cruelty. If we file the proper paperwork and if you're willing to testify to what Thomas did, the judge said he could grant a divorce. It might take a few months, but it can be done. Hope flickered across Julia's face, warring with fear. What if Thomas contests it? What if he comes here? Then he'll face me, Zachary said quietly. And the people of this town who have come to know and respect you. You're not alone anymore, Julia. You have me and will face whatever comes together. Julia threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. I want nothing more than to be your wife, to build a life with you without fear hanging over us. The next day, they visited Judge Morrison together. Julia told her story, showing the judge a small diary she'd kept that documented some of Thomas's violence. It wasn't much evidence, but combined with her testimony and the fact that Thomas hadn't made any legal effort to locate her through proper channels, the judge agreed to file for divorce on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. It'll take time, Judge Morrison warned. And if Mr. Zimmerman challenges it, things could get complicated. But based on what you've told me, I believe you have a valid case, Mrs. Zimmerman. Thank you, Your Honor, Julia said, her voice stronger than Zachary had ever heard it. Word spread through Jefferson about Julia's situation, though Zachary and Julia kept the details private. The town rallied around them in the way that frontier communities often did for their own. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house, made a point of inviting Julia to the church ladies' social. Mr. Henderson at the general store extended credit without question. Even Sheriff Wade, a gruff man who didn't involve himself in people's personal business, stopped by the stable to let Zachary know he'd keep an eye out for any suspicious strangers. The months of waiting were difficult. Every stranger who rode into town made Julia nervous, and she still had nightmares about Thomas finding her. But Zachary was always there, steady and patient, reminding her that they were building something stronger than her fear. During this time, they made plans for their future. Zachary had been saving money, and with Julia's input, they designed a house they'd build on a piece of land just outside town. It would have a wide porch, a proper kitchen, and enough bedrooms for the family they both hoped to have someday. I want at least 3 children, Julia said one evening as they looked over the house plans. I was an only child and it was lonely. I want our children to have siblings, to grow up with laughter and love filling the house. 3 sounds perfect, Zachary agreed, pulling her close. Though I should warn you, I have red-haired cousins on my mother's side. We might end up with a whole passel of carrot-topped youngsters running around. Julia laughed, and the sound filled Zachary with joy. She laughed more now, smiled more, carried herself with growing confidence. She was healing, becoming the woman she was meant to be before Thomas Zimmerman had tried to break her spirit. In February of 1879, 5 months after they'd filed the divorce petition, Judge Morrison summoned them to his office. Zachary's heart pounded as they entered, fearing bad news. "I wanted to tell you in person," the judge said, his stern face breaking into a rare smile. "The divorce has been granted. Mrs. Zimmerman, you are legally free of your former husband as of today." Julia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "It's really over. He didn't contest it." "He never responded to any of our notices," Judge Morrison said. "Either he didn't receive them or chose not to engage with the legal process. Either way, the divorce is final and legal. You're a free woman, miss." Julia turned to Zachary, tears streaming down her face, and he held her as she cried tears of relief and joy. After so many months of fear and uncertainty, she was finally, truly free. They were married 2 weeks later on a bright March morning. Julia wore a new dress that Mrs. Patterson and the other town ladies had helped her make, a beautiful blue silk that matched her eyes. Zachary wore his best suit, the one he'd bought years ago for his mother's funeral, and never had occasion to wear since. The ceremony took place in the small church on Main Street, with what seemed like half of Jefferson in attendance. Judge Morrison performed the ceremony, his formal legal language giving way to genuine warmth as he pronounced them man and wife. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Young," he said with a smile. Zachary cupped Julia's face in his hands and kissed her softly, sealing the promises they'd made to each other. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, with tables groaning under the weight of food that everyone had contributed. There was music and dancing, and Zachary held Julia close as they swayed to a fiddle tune, her head resting on his shoulder. "Happy, Mrs. Young," he murmured into her hair. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," Julia replied. "When I stumbled into your stable last summer, I was running toward nothing, just away from danger. I never imagined I'd find everything I'd ever wanted, a real home, a future, and a man who loves me for exactly who I am." "You found what you deserved all along," Zachary said, "and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." They moved into a small house Zachary had been renting while their permanent home was being built. It was modest but comfortable, and Julia threw herself into making it a real home, hanging curtains she'd sewn herself and planting a small garden in the yard. Life settled into a happy rhythm. Zachary continued running the stable with Julia as his full partner now, not just an employee. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building the kind of marriage based on friendship, trust, and deep love. In June, Julia realized she was expecting their first child. She told Zachary one evening after supper, her face glowing with joy and nervousness. "Are you sure?" Zachary asked, hardly daring to believe it. "As sure as I can be," Julia said. "I've missed 2 monthly courses, and I've been feeling sick in the mornings. Mrs. Patterson said those are the signs." Zachary let out a whoop of joy and picked Julia up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to be parents." That night, they lay in bed talking about names and whether it would be a boy or girl and what kind of parents they wanted to be. Julia placed Zachary's hand on her still flat stomach. "I promise you," she said softly, "our children will grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're safe, knowing they can be whoever they're meant to be. They'll never know the fear I knew." "No, they won't," Zachary agreed. "They'll know nothing but love and security, and they'll grow up strong because of it." The summer passed peacefully, with Julia's pregnancy progressing well despite some morning sickness. Their new house was completed in August, a beautiful structure with the wide porch they'd planned and windows that let in plenty of light. They moved in with help from their friends, filling the rooms with furniture Zachary had bought and small touches that Julia added to make it feel like home. In September, a year after Julia had first arrived in Jefferson, trouble finally caught up with them. Thomas Zimmerman rode into town with two men, demanding to know where his wife was. Sheriff Wade met them in the street, his hand resting casually on his gun. "If you're talking about Julia Zimmerman, there's no one here by that name," the sheriff said calmly. "There's a Julia Young, but she's married to Zachary Young and has been for 6 months now, legal and proper." Thomas's face turned red with rage. "She's my wife. She ran away, and I've come to take her home." "She was your wife," Sheriff Wade corrected. "Judge Morrison granted her a divorce last February on grounds of cruelty and abandonment. The marriage was dissolved legal-like, and she's free to marry whoever she chooses," which she did. "That's impossible. I never agreed to any divorce." "You were notified according to law," the sheriff said. "Fact that you didn't respond is your problem, not hers. Now, you can either ride on peaceful-like or I can arrest you for disturbing the peace. Your choice." Word reached Zachary at the stable within minutes. He locked up and hurried home, finding Julia standing on their porch with Mrs. Patterson and several other town ladies who'd rallied to her side. His wife's face was pale but determined. "He's here," she said simply when Zachary reached her. "I know," Zachary said, taking her hand. "And he's leaving. The sheriff's handling it." They watched from the porch as Thomas and his men were escorted to the edge of town. Thomas was shouting threats, but Sheriff Wade remained unmoved, his deputies flanking the unwelcome visitors until they were well beyond the town limits. That evening, Sheriff Wade stopped by their house. "He's gone," the lawman said. "But I won't lie to you folks, he made threats about coming back." "You should be careful for a while." "We will be," Zachary promised. "Thank you, Sheriff." After the sheriff left, Julia collapsed into a chair, shaking. "He knows where I am now," she whispered. "He'll come back." Zachary knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "Maybe he will and maybe he won't. But if he does, he'll find something very different from what he expects. He'll find a woman who's surrounded by people who care about her, who's protected by law and community, who's married to a man who will defend her with everything he has. You're not alone and helpless anymore, Julia. You're Julia Young, my wife, a respected member of this community, and you're carrying our child. That means something here." Julia looked into his eyes and found her strength again. "You're right," she said. "I'm not that frightened woman anymore. I'm not going to live in fear of him." As autumn turned to winter, Thomas Zimmerman didn't return. Whether he'd given up or simply moved on to other concerns, they didn't know and eventually stopped worrying about it. Life was too full of good things to waste energy on fear of what might happen. Julia's pregnancy progressed beautifully. She stayed active, continuing to help with lighter work around the stable and spending her evenings knitting tiny clothes and blankets. Zachary found himself touching her growing belly constantly, marveling at the life they'd created together. On a cold January morning in 1880, Julia went into labor. Mrs. Patterson came to help, along with the town's midwife, Mrs. Chen, whose expertise had brought countless babies safely into the world. Zachary paced outside the bedroom, wearing a path in the floorboards as he listened to the sounds from within. After 8 hours of labor, their son was born. The midwife emerged with a squalling bundle wrapped in blankets, placing him in Zachary's trembling arms. "You have a healthy boy, Mrs. Chen said with a warm smile. "And your wife did beautifully. She's tired but well." Zachary looked down at his son's tiny red face, at the shock of dark hair and the miniature fingers that gripped his thumb with surprising strength, and felt his heart expand with more love than he'd known was possible. "Can I see Julia?" he asked. "Of course. She's been asking for you." Julia lay propped up against pillows, her hair damp with sweat but her face radiant. When Zachary entered with their son, her eyes filled with happy tears. "Look at him," Zachary said softly, sitting on the edge of the bed and placing the baby in her arms. "Look at what we made together." Julia gazed at their son with wonder. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Zachary asked. They discussed names for months but never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Julia said, "Matthew. It means gift from God, and that's what he is." "Matthew Daniel Young." "Matthew Daniel Young," Zachary repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, son." The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Matthew was a healthy baby with a strong pair of lungs, and he kept them busy day and night. But Zachary and Julia worked together as they did in everything, taking turns with nighttime feedings and supporting each other through the challenges. The stable continued to thrive, and Zachary hired a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work, giving him more time to spend with his family. Julia managed the business side, keeping books and handling customers with the same competence she brought to everything. When Matthew was 6 months old, Zachary came home one evening to find Julia sitting on the porch with their son, watching the sunset. The sight of them together, his wife and child, filled him with contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "Do you ever think about that night you arrived here?" he asked, sitting down beside her and pulling them both close. "Sometimes," Julia said. "It feels like a lifetime ago, like that frightened woman was someone else entirely." "In a way, she was," Zachary said. "You've become the person you were always meant to be." "Because you gave me the chance," Julia said. "You gave me safety and love and the space to heal. You gave me a future I never dreamed was possible." "We gave each other that," Zachary corrected. "You brought life and purpose to my days. You made this house a home and gave me a family. We built this together, Julia." As the years passed, their family grew. In 1882, Julia gave birth to their daughter, Emily Rose, a beautiful baby with her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. 2 years later, their second son arrived, a robust baby they named Samuel James, who seemed determined to keep up with his older brother from day one. The stable expanded into a thriving business, with Zachary's reputation for honest dealing and quality care spreading throughout East Texas. They purchased the land they dreamed about and started breeding horses, beginning the ranch Zachary had always imagined. Julia became involved in the community, joining efforts to establish a proper school in Jefferson and advocating for better treatment of women and children. Her own experiences gave her a passion for helping others escape difficult situations, and she quietly assisted several women over the years who found themselves in circumstances similar to what she'd once faced. Thomas Zimmerman never returned to Jefferson. They heard through various sources that he'd been arrested for robbery in Kansas and sentenced to a long prison term. Julia felt nothing but relief at the news, and a kind of freedom knowing that the last shadow from her past had been removed. On their 10th wedding anniversary in March of 1889, Zachary and Julia stood on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Matthew was 9 now, a tall boy with his father's love of horses. Emily was 7, with her mother's nurturing spirit and sharp mind. Samuel was 5, full of energy and mischief. "Can you believe it's been 10 years?" Julia asked, leaning against Zachary's shoulder. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever," Zachary said, "but I wouldn't change a single moment of it, not even the hard times." Julia asked with a smile. "Especially not the hard times," Zachary said. "They made us stronger, brought us closer together. Every challenge we've faced together, and we've come through better for it." Julia turned to look at him. This man who'd given her everything when she had nothing, who'd loved her when she'd forgotten how to love herself, who'd built a life with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "I love you, Zachary Young," she said. "More today than the day we married, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today." "That's the secret, isn't it?" Zachary said, cupping her face in his hands. "Love that grows deeper with time, that's strengthened by everything life throws at it. That's what we have, and it's worth more than all the gold in California." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, while their children's laughter rang out across their land. The sun was setting over their ranch, painting the Texas sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, and everything they'd built together spread out before them, a testament to love, courage, and the future they'd created from the ashes of a painful past. In the years that followed, the Young family continued to flourish. Their horse breeding operation gained renown throughout Texas, with buyers coming from as far as Louisiana and Arkansas to purchase their animals. Zachary's reputation for breeding strong, reliable horses with gentle temperaments made their ranch a destination for serious buyers. Matthew grew into a fine young man who shared his father's gift with horses. By the time he was 16, he was training horses himself and developing innovative techniques that impressed even experienced horsemen. He had his father's patience and his mother's intelligence, a combination that served him well. Emily proved to be a natural teacher, spending hours helping her younger brother with his lessons and eventually assisting at the school her mother had helped establish. She had Julia's compassion and determination, along with a quick wit that kept her brothers on their toes. Samuel was the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions, always pushing boundaries. He inherited his father's courage and his mother's resilience, though his tendency to climb trees and race horses faster than he should gave Julia more than a few gray hairs. In 1891, Julia discovered she was expecting again, a surprise baby that both delighted and worried them, given that she was now 39 years old. But the pregnancy progressed smoothly, and in early 1892 they welcomed another daughter, Grace Elizabeth, into the world. The older children doted on their baby sister, and Grace brought a new energy to the household. The ranch prospered beyond their initial dreams. They employed several hands, men who became almost like family, and the operation ran smoothly under Zachary and Julia's combined management. Julia's business acumen proved as valuable as Zachary's skill with horses, and together they built something that would provide security for generations to come. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of everything. They still worked side by side when they could, still talked late into the night about their dreams and plans, still found ways to surprise and delight each other after so many years together. Their children grew up seeing what a true partnership looked like, what real love and respect between husband and wife meant. Jefferson itself changed over the years. The steamboat trade that had made it prosperous began to decline as railroads expanded across Texas. Some businesses struggled, but the Young ranch adapted, finding new markets and new opportunities. They weathered economic downturns and personal challenges with the same determination they'd always shown. One evening in the spring of 1895, when the bluebonnets carpeted their land in waves of purple and blue, Zachary and Julia sat on their porch as they'd done countless times before. Their children were older now. Matthew was 25 and courting a young woman from a neighboring ranch. Emily was 23 and teaching full-time at the school. Samuel was 21 and considering a career in law enforcement. And Grace was 3, a spirited toddler who kept everyone busy. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Julia asked. "When you gave me food and a place to sleep." Zachary thought back to that evening 17 years ago, to the frightened woman who'd stumbled into his stable. "I said we'd worry about payment later and that you needed food and rest. You also said that everybody deserves a chance at a better life," Julia reminded him, "and that you had a feeling I'd make something good out of that chance." "I was right, wasn't I?" Zachary said with a smile. "We both were," Julia said. "I made something good, but not alone. We built this together, every bit of it. This ranch, our children, the life we've created. It's ours, Zachary. Something nobody can take away because it's built on love and trust and hard work." Zachary pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling grateful for the 1,000th time for the day she'd walked into his life. "You know what amazes me most," he said. "How much I still love discovering new things about you. After 17 years, you can still surprise me, still make me laugh, still take my breath away." "That's because we keep growing together instead of apart," Julia said. "We don't take each other for granted. Every day we choose each other again. And I'll keep choosing you every day for the rest of my life," Zachary promised. As the years continued to pass, the Young family became a cornerstone of the Jefferson community. Matthew married his sweetheart, Sarah, and they built a house on the ranch property, eventually giving Zachary and Julia their first grandchildren. Emily married a lawyer from Marshall, Texas, and continued her teaching work while raising her own family. Samuel became a respected Texas Ranger, traveling throughout the state but always coming home to the ranch when he could. Grace grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's strength and her father's gentle heart. Through it all, Zachary and Julia remained devoted to each other. They weathered the challenges that came with aging, supporting each other through illnesses and losses, celebrating victories and milestones together. Their love, which had begun in desperate circumstances, had grown into something unshakable, a bond that only strengthened with time. On a warm evening in June of 1905, Zachary and Julia celebrated their 36th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch house rang with laughter and conversation, multiple generations gathering to honor the couple whose love had created this legacy. Matthew raised his glass in a toast. "To my parents, who showed all of us what real love looks like, what real partnership means. You built something beautiful together, not just this ranch, but a family rooted in love and respect. Everything we are, everything we have, comes from the foundation you gave us." "Hear, hear," echoed through the room as everyone raised their glasses. Later that evening, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Zachary and Julia walked hand in hand across their land. The moon was full, casting silver light across the pastures where horses grazed peacefully. In the distance, they could see lights from Matthew's house, where their grandchildren were probably being put to bed. "It's been a good life," Zachary said softly. "The best life," Julia agreed. "Sometimes I think about that terrified woman who arrived here all those years ago, and I can hardly believe that was me. I was so broken, so sure I'd never be whole again." "But you were always whole," Zachary said. "You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength, your own worth." You did the hard work of healing yourself, Julia. I just provided a safe place for that healing to happen." "You provided so much more than that," Julia said. "You gave me love when I didn't believe I deserved it. You gave me patience when I was struggling. You gave me a partner when I'd only known control and fear. You gave me a future I never dreamed was possible. And you gave me purpose," Zachary said. "Before you, I was just going through the motions of life, building a business but not really living. You brought joy and meaning to every day. You gave me love and family and everything that makes life worth living." They stood together in the moonlight, two people who'd found each other when they both needed it most, who'd built something lasting and true from the ashes of Julia's painful past. Around them stretched the ranch they'd created, the land they'd nurtured, the legacy they'd leave to future generations. "You think the children understand how lucky they are?" Julia asked. "To grow up with so much love, so much security." "I think they do," Zachary said. "But more importantly, they're passing it on to their own children. The love we gave them, they're multiplying it, spreading it further. That's the real legacy, Julia. Not the ranch or the money or any material thing. It's the love that keeps growing generation after generation." Julia rested her head on his shoulder, feeling completely at peace. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Missouri to Texas, from fear to freedom, from brokenness to wholeness. Every hardship, every challenge, every moment of doubt had led to this, standing on her own land with the man she loved, surrounded by the family they'd created together. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" Zachary asked. "For seeing past my fear to who I really was," Julia said. "For believing in me when I couldn't believe in myself. For loving me enough to give me time to heal. For building this beautiful life with me." Zachary kissed her forehead gently. "Thank you for trusting me, for choosing me, for making every single day of the past 36 years an adventure. Thank you for our children, for this ranch, for the life we've built together. Thank you for being exactly who you are." They stood together for a long time, watching the moon rise higher in the sky, listening to the peaceful sounds of their land. Horses nickered softly in the pastures. A night bird called from somewhere in the trees. In the distance, a coyote howled and another answered. "We should head back," Zachary said eventually. "It's getting late." "Just a few more minutes," Julia said, not wanting the moment to end. "I want to remember this, all of it. The feel of the breeze, the sound of the horses, the way the moonlight makes everything look magical. I want to remember standing here with you, feeling completely and utterly happy." "We can stay as long as you want," Zachary said, holding her close. "We have all the time in the world." And they did. They had built a life that would endure long after they were gone, a legacy of love and courage and determination that would inspire their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They had taken the broken pieces of Julia's past and transformed them into something beautiful and whole. The woman who'd arrived at a Jefferson stable in 1878, running from a terrible past with nothing but the clothes on her back and fear in her heart, had found everything she'd ever needed and so much more. She'd found safety, love, purpose, and family. She'd found herself. And the cowboy who'd offered her shelter that night had found his own transformation. He discovered that the ranch he'd always dreamed of was more than land and horses. It was about the people you shared it with, the love that made a house a home, the family that gave purpose to all the work. Together, they'd created something that would last, a love story that began with an act of kindness and grew into a lifetime of devotion. A story that proved that no matter how dark the past, the future could be bright when you had someone to face it with, someone who believed in you, someone who loved you with their whole heart. As they finally walked back to the house, hand in hand, the moon lit their way. Inside, The house welcomed them with warm light and familiar comfort, a testament to the home they'd built together. They'd face whatever years remained to them the same way they'd faced everything else, together, with love and courage and unshakable faith in each other. The ranch continued to thrive under their guidance. Their children flourished, their grandchildren grew strong and healthy, and through it all, their love remained constant. It was the love that had saved them both, that had given them purpose and meaning, that had transformed both their lives in ways neither could have imagined that night so many years ago. Julia looked around their home, at the photographs on the walls showing their family growing through the years, at the furniture worn smooth by use and love, at all the small touches that made this place uniquely theirs. Every corner held memories, every room echoed with laughter and conversation from decades of living. "We did good," she said softly to Zachary. "We did better than good," he replied, pulling her close for one more kiss. "We did extraordinary," and they had. Against all odds, despite a difficult beginning, they'd built a life filled with love, family, and happiness. They'd proven that the past didn't have to define the future, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, that two people committed to each other could overcome any obstacle. In the end, that night in 1878, when a frightened woman stumbled into a stable and a cowboy offered her shelter, had changed both their lives forever. It had set them on a path neither could have imagined, leading to a future neither had dared to dream of. It had brought them together, and together they'd built something beautiful and lasting and true. Their love story would be told for generations, an example of how courage and kindness and devotion could transform lives, how two people could find each other in the darkest moments and create light together. It was a story of hope and healing, of second chances and new beginnings, of love that conquered all. And on that June evening in 1905, standing in the home they'd built together, surrounded by evidence of the life they'd created, Zachary and Julia Young knew with absolute certainty that every moment, every challenge, every tear and triumph had been worth it. They had found in each other everything they'd ever needed, and they would love each other until their very last days and beyond. Their story was complete, a beautiful circle from that first desperate night to this moment of perfect contentment, from a woman hiding from her past to a couple who'd built a future neither had dreamed possible. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the American frontier, proving that even in the wildest, hardest places, love could flourish and grow and create miracles. And as the moon continued its journey across the Texas sky, as the horses settled in their pastures, as the land they'd nurtured rested beneath the stars, Zachary and Julia Young held each other close, grateful for every moment they'd been given, for every year they'd shared, for the love that had sustained them through everything and would continue to sustain them always.